Well, I'm joined by my brilliant colleague and friend, Chris Nash, Head of Community at Discovery Education, another former very experienced teacher, SEN teacher as well, actually, for a long time, when you'll probably talk about that. That was a good discussion with Dan, wasn't it, Chris?
Wow. I mean, I literally thought I had a decent set of questions on the paper in front of me for the next section, and I've just filled up 4 pieces of paper with new ideas and new thoughts and new questions. I mean, so many amazing things there. I particularly love that, helping navigating a world that isn't fair, teaching modelling the type of world that they want to have. But I think it was the themes of identity and labelling and perception that I think were the most salient to me. You know, my very first teaching job, very first day, very first teaching job. I'm walking into school, I'm walking down the corridor, and I get stopped. And you're Chris. Yes, you've got year 1. Oh, was the response. Well, that was a bit odd, strange. What bit further down the corridor, another teacher stops me. Oh yes, you've got year 1. Yes, you've got Lewis.
Oh, right.
And by the time I got to the classroom, I think I'd heard this about 5 times from teachers, parents, all sorts. You've got Lewis, the naughty boy.
Lewis was a VIP.
Can you imagine what I'm thinking before I walk into the classroom? What I'm going to see at the back of this year 1 classroom, this Lewis, the naughty boy, this whirlwind, this terror. And I walk into class and I'm looking around and I can't spot this character Lewis anywhere. And then I see this boy in the corner of the room, and it kind of, the penny starts to drop, if you like. You know, there's I mean, certainly there was the unseen, the unsaid Lewis. Clearly he's a black boy. And that means something to some people, and this was a kind of a very interesting starting point. But the next reflection was when I looked over, it's like, wow, Lewis, I can see there are issues there. There really are issues there. And then we, you know, I started to get him assessed for ASD and various other, you know, kind of other issues. But we still had to tackle what was going on with this perception in class. This awful labelling that had been happening around the naughty boy. And do you know my one single strategy that worked in that situation for this naughty boy to change? Was I spent the next 3 months telling every blooming person I could that Lewis wasn't a naughty boy. Lewis was a good boy. Lewis was a great boy. Lewis was fab. And by the end of the 3rd, 4th week, he was being included in playground games. He was, you know, a year later, mum stopping me on the high street. Yay, Lewis, thank you so much. 5 years later, I think she cornered me on Rayners Lane High Street and to let me know that he transitioned into junior school and was head boy. Had been made head boy.
That's marvellous. That's
so marvelous. I've taken that story with me everywhere. So
that's
important.
Very empowering.
Yeah, so important, this notion of identity and labelling, and what it means to be excluded because of how you've been perceived to be, whatever that perception is.
For sure.
So I'm really, really excited now to try.
Yeah. Well, you're going to have a great discussion.
Yeah, into our class discussion
with 2 very experienced, great teachers. So why don't I let you introduce them, if that's okay, and then I'll get out of your way for a bit.
Fantastic, that'd be amazing, Andrew. Thank you. So I'm really, really delighted to we've got Joel, who's joining us today. So Joel is assistant head teacher at Christchurch Primary School in Purley and Croydon. Hi, Joel. And he leads a staff group focusing on curriculum diversity and representation. He's passionate in ensuring all children feel valued and represented within the curriculum. So welcome, Joel. Really delighted to have you today. Did you get a chance to watch any of the session with Diane?
Yeah, I did. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was so interesting to hear Diane speaking. Lots of little nuggets I can help bring to our school as well.
Fabulous. So really great, and I hope we're going to weave some of these into our conversation coming up. And also really delighted to welcome Mark. And Mark's a primary school teacher, currently teaching in year 3, but also taught in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. He's currently the PSHE lead at Lee Chapel Primary School in Essex, and has been for 3 years. He's also very passionate about sports and has been a very keen footballer. And he really likes to promote a healthy and sporting lifestyle within his class. And he likes to promote this through school initiatives wherever he can. So welcome to you, Mark, as well. Really delighted to have you on. That was such an incredible, thought-provoking discussion with Diane. And I was saying to Andrew, I thought I had my questions fairly tight and organised and arranged for this, but I think it's just blown some of them out of the water. I'm going to try and weave some of that into our discussion today, if that's okay. But I think I'm going to start with this notion of inclusion or an inclusive culture. What does an inclusive classroom look like? I spent a big chunk of my teaching career in a special school. So I worked almost exclusively with children that have been excluded from education, excluded from the classroom, excluded from social settings, you know, kind of the standard life that you would expect them to have. And they were excluded for all sorts of reasons. But the big discussion at the time was around this word inclusion. It was a time when special schools were being shut up and down the country because it was deemed that the correct place to have all children was in a mainstream setting. You know, inclusion meant all children being taught within a mainstream setting, and that was the best place for all children to be. We were adamant at a school that inclusion meant entitlement to the right kind of curriculum. It meant entitlement to the right kind of teaching, the right materials, the right resources. That was a long time ago. I'm talking about the 1990s. Do you think the discussion around inclusion, or how we frame the discussion around inclusion, has changed today? I don't want to go kind of backwards and forwards with you, Joel. No, please feel free to jump in at any point. But let's start with you, Joel.
Yeah. So I mean, when I first started teaching, the topic of inclusion was probably more about special education and just you know, which children with particular needs and how you're going to support them, and maybe, you know, a bit of a discussion about gifted and talented children as well. Whereas I feel like now it seems to have evolved to be much more about inclusion for all and encouraging everyone to be able to achieve well, in, you know, relevant to what their you know, to their starting point. And someone recently shared with me this image, which was really lovely, which is of a garden with lots of flowers, and the flowers are different and they're different heights and they look different and they bloom at different stages. And for me, like, that inclusive culture is about giving everyone the opportunity to flourish, to bloom. It might look different for different people, but everyone has those opportunities to bloom and to achieve well. And, you know, our current national curriculum doesn't necessarily always provide children with those opportunities to feel like they've achieved well. But inclusive culture, I feel like, just goes beyond that to giving those children the support they need, to help them with that mindset of knowing that they're valuable and their best is fantastic, no matter what that is.
It's interesting you chose that analogy of the garden. It's one I've used many times in lectures to try and exactly get across that point, the diversity, but also, you know, the incredible growth surprising growth that you can have within individuals, and how important it is to nurture and, you know, tend to them. And, you know, what is considered a weed to some people is a beautiful flower to someone else. I think it's an absolutely fabulous analogy. Mark, how about you? Where do you see the discussion on inclusion being framed now?
Actually, I completely agree with Joel, what he said about how every child has their own kind of specialities. Every child has their own kind of their goals and what they should be trying to strive for. Now, it's just, as a teacher, it's hard to try and kind of pick and choose where you try and focus on. So some children, obviously, although maths and English is very, very important across the curriculum, however, for some children, their goals might be more life orientated. So you might be trying to teach people skills, teaching manners and little things like that, to try and help them when they do leave school, when they do go to secondary school, to be a bit more resilient and be able to kind of work their way in their own little way, you know, successfully in the real world. As a teacher, that's part of our job as well, to do those things too, to try and find those little nuggets to try and help them achieve their goals. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think I was going to lead on to that with a question about the why, you know, why do we need to develop this inclusive culture? I'm not entirely sure, based on the conversation we had with Diane earlier, we need to dwell too much on that. I mean, you know, clearly it's essential. Everyone needs to feel valued. Everyone needs to feel welcomed. Everyone needs to feel included and special. But clearly it doesn't happen. There's all sorts of reasons it doesn't happen. When again, when I was in special school, we had all sorts of children that were excluded for a variety of different reasons. Where do you think those barriers sit now? I mean, you know, I think we mentioned back then it was very much around that special needs agenda, and a lot of those barriers came through either because of physical needs, that they maybe needed a wheelchair, or they didn't have speech, or it was because of learning needs. So, you know, they couldn't learn at the same pace, or needed particular things to help them to learn at the same place, or even because behaviour. What do you think are the big barriers to learning now?
Sometimes it could be with attainment. So I know that all teachers, we have like we have to drag all the children up to a certain level, and sometimes where obviously some children don't meet those needs, sometimes we have to teach them the maths and English a little bit more to try and drag them up to where everyone is, instead of trying to, you know, we should be really trying to focus on what they need as an individual. But sometimes we kind of told we've got to try and build them up to be, you know, maths and English orientated a little bit too much sometimes. So it's kind of having that focus on the individual. That's that. I suppose that would be the word. Some of the barriers might be as well.
Well, what do you feel? What do you feel, Joel? How do you? Where do you perceive these barriers? Where do they impact on your school?
Well, coming back to what Mark said about the sort of these curriculum expectations, and also the sort of the intense pressure that schools are under to achieve a certain number of expected or greater depth marks. I feel like, you know, as you move through school, there's a real danger if schools don't have their priorities in the right places. You can go down the route of, you know, prioritizing the children who have a chance of getting to expected or to greater depth, which, you know, as we all can understand now, that's not fair and it's not right. I mean, one thing that I've noticed is that inclusion, it's messy. And sometimes as teachers, we like things to be quite neat. And, you know, we like to maybe have, you know, a couple of challenges, maybe three levels of learning in a lesson. But the reality is that that doesn't meet everyone's needs. And the reality is that sometimes inclusion can be getting on the floor of a child when they're struggling. Sometimes inclusion can be, it can take so many different forms. And just coming back to what Diane said earlier about everyone having their own needs and everyone being an individual, it's so important. And that can look messy. It can look sometimes a bit disorganized, because, you know, a child's needs in one lesson might be completely different to another lesson. They may have seen something or had an experience in a break time which, you know, triggers a reaction in them. So it's about understanding the children and being willing to get sort of down, getting our hands dirty, and being willing to have a sort of messy environment which really prioritizes the needs of people. I don't mean messy physically and, you know, environmental, but I mean in terms of it doesn't always fit into a nice, ordered, neat box that we want it to.
Absolutely, there is no real one size fits all. Are there any particular strategies that you brought into school that you think have really worked on making everyone in school feel valued? Any celebrations or any particular aspects of the school culture that really draws out those individuals and allows them to be celebrated for who they are individually, not as a collective?
It's something that's maybe coming away from the special needs side of things. We've tried to diversify our curriculum, so we kind of looked up and down from year 1 to 6. We studied a lot of Roald Dahls. You know, we probably had 3 Roald Dahl books in the whole school, which is amazing. We all love Roald Dahl as primary school teachers. He's an amazing author, but we wanted to kind of diversify the cultures, the ethnicities of the authors, as well as the subjects we were kind of studying. So we tried to come away from like typically kind of white authors, shall we say, to try and look at other authors, other icons, other kinds of famous people as well, to try and get children to look at, so they feel kind of valued, to make sure they also feel recognized by the things that we teach as well. So that's another way to make sure that everyone kind of can see themselves, putting themselves in their shoes as well, so they can kind of, especially someone like Marcus Rashford, because it's like a new kind of icon at the moment, and he needs to be celebrated. He's doing such a good job with especially within primary schools. It's great for like the black kind of community in our school to see someone like that doing a really fantastic job. So it's about, as teachers, you've got to try and highlight that and use that kind of I've had the opportunity to show the children.
Yeah. And it's important to celebrate him not just as a footballer, brilliant as he is, but as the brilliant person he is, like we all are, outside of just being known for that one core thing. I think gets back to the issues we have around perception and labeling and identity, because you're saying this person is that or that person is that, which we, you know, we're all, I think we're all in agreement that that isn't a particularly productive route to go down. I know that, Joel, you've done a lot of work on your curriculum as well. It's been a very a big project for you over the last few years. Where do you see the focus for that?
So I mean, we're lucky enough to have a very diverse school and a diverse teaching staff, and I guess for the last few years we've been becoming more and more aware that what we've been offering the children isn't representative of our community, and so I mean we sort of around this time last year we started a working group, and we have 17 members of staff who volunteered to come and join on the group. So we've been looking at sort of reviewing our curriculum, similar to what Mark said, I suppose, but looking at different areas of school life as well. So looking at the curriculum, looking at representation across school, looking at how do we celebrate diversity? Do our displays around school all celebrate diversity? Is there a display in each year group which we could look at and show that, you know, really shows who we are as a school and the fact that we welcome everyone and everyone's valuable and everyone is equal and special. So we put a lot of work into those displays, making sure that they're really evident, really clear for people coming into the school, and looking at representation in everything we do. So as a Church of England school, we have, you know, we do daily collective worship time, and we make sure every single one of our images that we show, you know, they represent the broadness and the richness of our community. I think when children don't see themselves, even without saying any words, it can give them a sense of value, or, you know, conversely, it can show that maybe they don't feel valued or feel celebrated. So we try and make sure that when every image we put, well, not every image, but, you know, we have a variety of images in everything we do, in our teaching slides, on our displays, in those images we share in collective worship time, and then moving through into curriculum. I think there was a question asked earlier about whether the national curriculum now is restrictive towards actually teaching that. But we found that if you really are willing to search, there are lots of information. There's lots of information out there which you can use to promote diversity and to teach about Black history, or to teach about the history of the contributions of other ethnic groups to Britain. It just requires people to be really willing to go that extra mile and take the extra time it takes to research it. Similar to what Andrew said earlier, that, you know, my education, I didn't see it all. I'm ignorant to a lot of things, and it's required just a lot of humility, and I've had to be made humble, I guess, at times, because I don't have the answers. I don't know. But if you're willing to listen, and you're willing to look for advice, and to listen to each other's sort of viewpoints and ideas, then you can really enhance the curriculum. You know, in our school, we're trying not to just go down a Black History Month. You know, there's so much great stuff that happens in Black History Month, but why should the Black children in our school only be represented 1 month a year? It should be interwoven in everything we do. And so we've been looking at, you know, in Victorians, there are loads of Black inventors who contributed to sort of development at that time. You know, you could look, if you're looking at Florence Nightingale, well, let's look at Mary Seacole as well. We're lucky enough in Croydon, we've got quite a famous mixed race composer and there's a statue of him in Croydon. So if you're willing to look for the opportunities, then we can find them. But it just does take a little bit of extra thought to think outside the box, to go a bit further than just recycling and regurgitating the same lesson plans that you've used in previous years.
No, completely. And does it just stop with the curriculum though? Is it just about identifying where the weaknesses are in the curriculum and trying to change that? Are there other agencies that we need to engage with to ensure that this is really well established in schools? I suppose I'm thinking of the other stakeholders who are part of that building that inclusive culture within a school? It's not just the teachers.
It's difficult, isn't it? So as much as we as teachers, we teach the children as many good things as we can, but it's when they go home, it's like parents obviously have a massive influence on children as well. So, I mean, I suppose it's something we don't do right now, but I suppose actually kind of sending something out for parents to have a look at as well. Could they maybe, not that we want to teach the parents, I know that might be quite challenging at some point, and the thought of it actually scares me to do that. But doing something like that could actually have that voice at home as well, not just in schools. As much as teachers have that influence here, when they go home, it's a completely different kind of world, isn't it? They can, their opinions can change. As much as they might have said things in school, they go home, they speak to mummy and daddy about it. It can change. So that's something that we could look into in the future, possibly. Yeah,
I do know some schools that take that on board kind of quite proactively, and they bring parents in for doing talks and doing sessions with children and doing assemblies, etc., and trying to have that as part of that increasingly kind of diverse approach to their local community. Is that something you've ever is that something you utilize in school yourselves?
Something that's been tricky over the last few years with obviously the pandemic and things like that, but we haven't done something like that at our school yet. But I think it's a fantastic idea, something like that. That sounds good. I don't know about you, Joel. Have you done anything like that at your school, Joel? Or?
So yeah, we would regularly normally have parents in for all sorts of things. You know, we'd have it for reading support or for teaching math methods. So moving forward, yeah, I think that could be really a valuable opportunity to speak to parents and to try and get those values that we hold dear in our school to be really held dear at home as well. And we're trying to sort of communicate more about what we're doing with parents. I think we've been trying hard at school to make adjustments and improvements, but sometimes there's a perception outside of school that maybe things aren't moving as fast as they would like them to be moving towards diversity and inclusion, or particularly with representation. And so, along this journey of inclusion and representation, I'm learning so much all the time. And that communication with parents is so vital, because not just the parents of those, from ethnic minority groups, but maybe from the white British groups as well, to know this is important to us and that these are values that we hold dear. And even earlier, I was thinking about, our school is very diverse, but how would this fit in for maybe a school somewhere else in the country, maybe a rural school where it's mainly white British children? I was thinking, well, how important is this for those children who maybe don't have the opportunities to mix with the broad range of different cultures and ethnic groups? It's so important for those schools to really to gear up and to teach this as well, and to make sure that the white British children see, the full range and the full beauty of our diverse communities in the country really clearly through their curriculum as well.
I think it was, and I can't remember the exact phrase she used. Diane was talking about that that little lazy figure in your head when you haven't been exposed to broad diversity. The nature, your second nature, is to just kind of try and close off, and you make assumptions and you use those labels in a rather negative way. How can we keep that funnel open? How can we ensure that we are not closing ourselves off, that we are not restricting who we are through labeling and being too trying to identify too closely people to one particular attitude or attribute, or saying that, oh, he's always sporty, or she's always this, or they're always that. How do we avoid that in the classroom? How do we challenge that in the classroom?
Just a lesson I did in year 2, I think it was last year, like during the lockdown. I just started using Discovery Education platform, and it was a year 2 lesson, and it was to do with stereotypes. So it had a man and a woman, and it had one that was kind of driving around in an F1 race car. It was going around zipping around the racetrack, and then it had a ballerina like beautifully dancing around a dance hall. And then obviously the children was like, right, children, which one do you think is which? Is this going to be a man's job, or is it going to be a woman's job? So, and having that conversation in the classroom, and I think as a teacher you think, oh, they're not going to get this, they're going to get this wrong. But actually, what was quite surprising to me was that the children actually kind of clocked onto it pretty quickly. So actually, women are just as capable to be in an F1 race car as men. So it was lovely talks. I think they've definitely evolved a lot more. They know a lot more than we think sometimes, children as well, you know. And that was a great lesson to talk about stereotypes and talk about, wasn't just jobs, it was talked about lots of different things as well. So as a great conversation starter or a lesson like that, that was fantastic.
It's one of my absolute favourite videos. That particular one. It comes from our health and relationships program, and it's on the similarities and differences strand. I think what really struck me in the first instance, the children are asked to describe the roles for this male and female character, and it's quite shocking at year 2 how ingrained those stereotypes are. But it's also so delightful how quickly they can be blown apart. And I think for me, the delight in that video is right at the very end. Guillaume it's a ballet dancer, the lovely Guillaume, and the very final shot you see gathered around Guillaume at the front as he's doing his pliés, etc., is a solid wall of boys following in and joining in. And that for me was real testament to what we can do as educators, and how we can, just with some really fabulous clever play in the classroom, completely flip round the perceptions that those children have. Is anything similar that you've kind of used in the school, Joel, that's had equal impact?
I mean, yeah. So we're sort of looking into doing an Africa topic at the moment both in year 5 and 6 at school, and a lot of what we've been doing is trying to bust those stereotypes. And we're lucky enough to have one of our teaching assistants has got some friends who live in Nigeria, and so she got them to send in some sort of a video of their house. And obviously, the stereotype that the children may have heard before is mud huts and poverty. But what they got to see was this absolute mansion with a cinema room inside, with a TV much bigger than any of the children in our class would have in their own homes. And they had an opportunity to see the prosperity as well, and to get that more balanced view. And one of the things we were worried about with choosing a topic like learning about Africa is we have to make sure we're not perpetuating those stereotypes, and that we're breaking them, and we're really giving children an open mind to what life can be like in any country. And in our country, we've got our own fair share of poverty and people who are struggling, just like any country does. So for us, that was really, really powerful to have that opportunity to see how people from any culture or any country can have luxury or have prosperity as well.
It's interesting you say that. We're redoing one of our resources very specifically from that intent. I need to get Christina, our head of content, who's up next, to have a conversation with you at some point and pick your brains about some of your ideas and thoughts around that. Absolutely fantastic, guys. Thank you so much. That was an intense conversation. It was a powerful conversation. I think we've all taken huge amounts forward from that. What do you think, Andrew?
Oh, it was really interesting. Some beautiful analogies there as well, actually. Absolutely terrific, particularly because there's a wonderful flower behind you, Mark. So that kind of fits, doesn't it? Beautifully, actually. And Joel, you talked about that, or at least I heard you talk about that curiosity that Dan Louise Jordan called for in her brilliant call to action, really, where you can look into local figures in your local area that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily have gone to and need to seek out. And that's brilliant. The Florence Nightingale, Mary Siegel is a good example, isn't it? So yeah, power to your elbow. Good on you. I think that was terrific. Really empowering.